Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Risk with Dr. Naveen Agarwal. Each week, we talk about a topic related to risk management of medical devices in a very casual and informal way. This is not a webinar or lecture. Rather, our goal is to talk about key topics and challenges in a very informal way and share best practices. I'm your host, Naveen Agarwal, and I'm the principal and founder at Achieve, where my personal mission is to help you achieve success in risk management. Well, hello everyone, and welcome once again to our weekly Let's Talk Risk show. And guys, I'm thrilled to welcome Nidhi Kani today, and we're going to talk about cybersecurity. Nidhi has so much hands-on experience with cybersecurity, both on the technical side as well as on the regulatory side. I can't wait to have this conversation going. And you all know the drill, right? It is a very casual and informal conversation. So Nidhi and I will chat for about 10-15 minutes, set the stage, but then we would like to invite you to participate. So with that, Nidhi, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you, Naveen. It's an honor to be here. I've learned a lot from your community in the past, so I feel very privileged to give back.
Oh, that's awesome, Nidhi. I'm so excited about this. First, let's have you introduce briefly to our audience.
Okay. All right. Hello, I'm Nidhi Kani, and I'm originally a biotechnology engineer, but been a regulatory affairs professional for over 8 years now, and been in the med device industry all the while, and recently transitioned towards regulatory cybersecurity, even before actually cybersecurity became a law or a requirement. So that pretty much gave me like a head start within the industry. And right now, I'm into cybersecurity consulting, and I thoroughly enjoy that role. I also teach at Northeastern, digital health and cybersecurity. I'm also a cybersecurity fellow at the Archimedes Center for Medical Devices and Healthcare Security. So it's very nice to speak to all of you.
Wonderful, Nidhi. So let's start by just setting the stage. Why is cybersecurity such a big deal for medical devices now? Can you just give us some context?
Yes, absolutely. When we think about cybersecurity, we generally have this misconception of mixing it up with privacy. But data privacy and data security, which is cybersecurity, are two different concepts. And this is where cybersecurity by itself becomes important, because today it is not just about protecting your data. It is also about protecting safety that comes with the medical devices. For example, say that you have a pacemaker or a continuous glucose monitor, which delivers therapy, and it has a capability to put you through hyperglycemia or hypoglycemia because they run on algorithms and applications, and they're connected to the internet, which makes it vulnerable. So this is where cybersecurity becomes important, because here you're looking at how can we protect these systems from affecting patient health? How can we protect the system from not going through cyber incidents, right? Which is directly related to patient safety here. Yeah. That's why cybersecurity has become important today.
You know, it reminds me, way back when, I was hooked on a show called Homeland. And I don't know if you guys have ever watched that show. It was on Showtime. It was like a CIA type of very dramatic action-packed show, and I was hooked on it. And in one of the shows, actually, they show, and it was like more than 10-15 years ago, I think, they show an attack on the vice president who has a pacemaker. You know, they hack into the pacemaker and make it do some crazy things, and things happen. And there was a follow-up when actually Dick Cheney at that time, who was the vice president, had some of the features disabled to protect him. It came out later on. So what you are saying is really, you know, people imagined it before, but now it is facing the reality because our medical devices are part of a big ecosystem in a connected environment, right? That's what makes it so critical for us to be aware of cybersecurity, right?
Absolutely. And beyond that also, even when it comes to hospitals, when we go to hospitals today, a lot of devices are connected on the internet, and the future of surgical rooms is going to be Wi-Fi connected and virtual reality and augmented reality. At that point, the hospital can be rendered dysfunctional, and we don't know how that's going to affect the treatment of the device. So you can be looking at wrong diagnosis, wrong treatment plans, so many such devastating effects with cybersecurity.
Great, guys. Those of you who are joining us a little bit late, we are talking about cybersecurity with Nidhi today. And I invite you to bring your thoughts and perspectives and challenges and best practices later on during our interactive session. So Nidhi, let's continue. We know that the regulatory environment is evolving fast around cybersecurity. And I know FDA came out with their final guidance for pre-market submission for cybersecurity last year. And in that guidance, it was very curious for me to note that they emphasize something called SPDF, which is Secure Product Development Framework. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how it is different from just the regular design control process that we have in our practice?
Right. So with respect to, let me take a step back. Security seems very overwhelming, but it is not, because it is the same thing as, or very similar to how you would follow through with a safety risk assessment. But with secure product development lifecycle, the primary goal is to manufacture and maintain safe and effective devices. When we are talking about secure product development lifecycle, the name itself is self-explanatory, where it talks about the entire lifecycle, right from the supply chain to your post-market surveillance. The aim of SPDF is to ultimately reduce the number and severity of vulnerabilities. Basically, you want to reduce the exploitability of the device, which means that you're going to start to look into your supply chain, your software bill of materials, from which the vulnerabilities are coming through. Then you move through threat model, risk assessment, through your post-market surveillance. So you're closing that loop. That's why it is a little different from safety, and it's not different from safety, because both of them are following through the entire life cycle. But security and safety are two independent and interdependent beasts that are responsible for safety and effectiveness of the device.
Yeah. So Nidhi, you I think you have said it so perfectly, so eloquently. Let's talk about some of the challenges people are facing in the real world. In your practice, what have you seen people struggle the most with SPDF approach?
That's a good question, because with SPDF, the very first thing is there's so much information on cybersecurity today that it's become confusing. That's why we're not able to shift through the noise to understand how can we make security risk assessment talk to safety risk assessment. Because to get a little bit technical, when you look at the AMI TIR 57 standard, which is the cybersecurity risk management standard, and the ISO 14971, which is the safety risk assessment standard, if you look, there's a diagram actually where it talks about how security impacts safety risks. And that's the challenge, because in safety, you're looking at occurrence by a quantitative methodology. But in security, you cannot take the quantitative approach, because you go with an approach that when will the cyber attack happen? We are not looking at if the cyber attack will happen. So that probability becomes quite subjective at that point. It's at 100. It's not 0 or 1. It's like 1. So that's one of the major challenges that we see when companies start to do their security risk assessment.
That's a great point. And I know FDA makes actually a key point here in their guidance to emphasize this point that you just talked about. And I want our viewers to also know that ISO TR 24971 has a full annex on security risk management. I really encourage everybody to take a look at that. But you are making a good point that this knowledge is evolving so fast. So much information is coming out at us that it's difficult to kind of sift through that. So I'm so glad we are having this conversation. So Nidhi, let's continue. Let's talk a little bit about the post-market phase. What is important there, and where are people struggling the most?
The interesting part about, again, security is it's so much more about post-market than it is about pre-market, because there is only so much you can do in your pre-market, because yes, you can predict certain vulnerabilities and all of that, but it's not completely possible to look forward. So that's why having this vulnerability management plan and vulnerability monitoring and tracking becomes super critical to security of your device, because software is legacy day one. The moment it is out, you are exposing yourself to attacks and vulnerabilities. And the best way to keep track of such an agile environment is to have a monitoring and management plan, which is what FDA also looks at. Because when you're doing your pre-market, from your supply chain management, you're looking at your SBOM, which is a software bill of materials. Then you're also looking at what vulnerabilities the SBOM has. Now, just because it does not have vulnerabilities at that point in time does not mean that it is safe forever. Mm-hmm. So once the device is out, you have to continue monitoring and tracking that. So that is a key point. But the challenges there are one is resources, because dedicating that resource is very important, and not a lot of companies like startups have that kind of financial backing to invest in that.
Mm-hmm. You said something that I'm going to remember from this conversation. Software is legacy from day one. This is such an insightful point to remember. As soon as you release it, it's legacy. It's going to change. We know it's going to change, and we're going to learn a lot more. So what I'm hearing you say is that it is an area of challenge. And to some extent, in my view, I think it also offers an opportunity for all of us to play a leadership role and maybe see this as an opportunity to advance our own careers. Can you say a little bit more about how quality regulatory practitioners in our industry can actually take advantage of this opportunity?
Yes, so I come from biotechnology background and regulatory affairs background. I absolutely did not want to study technology, and that's why I chose biotechnology. But here I am in the fields of cybersecurity, learning software, learning AI, ML, and cybersecurity. So I think if it's a good opportunity for us to shape our careers for the future. And if you're at the intersection of quality and regulatory, it's a very good opportunity, because today more than so ever we are in need of interdisciplinary careers. So there are experts in security engineering, there are experts in regulatory, but the gap between both languages is what this regulatory affairs, cybersecurity professional can fill in. And regulatory affairs as a role has been shifting towards left, right from the genesis of the idea towards even mergers, acquisitions as well. So that's why I think regulatory affairs cybersecurity is a very niche role that can facilitate conversations between engineering as well as policymakers.
Wonderful. Awesome. So guys, I'm going to open up the floor for questions, comments, perspectives from all of you. Please don't hold back, because this conversation is useful only when you participate. But Nidhi, as we wait for folks to request joining us, I have another question for you. When you were transitioning into this field, what was your specific challenge and how did you overcome that?
My specific challenge here in this role was, one, to understand technology, because I came from, I used to work for Smith & Nephew, which was more hardware-related products, so you could see them, feel them. But when I started to transition towards digital health, to even broaden my mindset or open my mind to a virtual environment, that was a very big challenge for me, because I couldn't understand how are two systems talking to each other when they are not connected physically with each other.
I see.
That, I think, was my very basic challenge, I would say.
So briefly, how did you overcome that?
I started to develop a mindset of okay, there is one other, we live in the physical world, but there's also a virtual world. So how do we communicate virtually? So I would place myself and imagine myself in a virtual world and think that, okay, this is how it works. And I obviously spoke to a lot of engineers, asked them questions. This was when I was working at Harvard Innovations Lab at a startup. I came with 5 years experience, but everyone else was from PhD. And I used to feel very dumb to ask these basic questions. But putting that embarrassment behind, I think I had to really dig into trying to understand how to go about learning the technology. And that's how the first 2 years I spent learning the technology and cybersecurity and all of that. And then I got quite comfortable with it.
Oh, that's awesome, Nidhi. So great to hear your personal journey. And now we have Rafael and Taylor joining us. So Rafael, you are first. Please unmute your mic and share what you have in mind.
Thank you very much, Naveen. One issue I've run into dealing in cybersecurity, and my background is I came at it a little bit differently because I was originally trained as a software engineer, and then I came to quality and regulatory through hearing aids of all things.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I run into is convincing higher-ups how to apply the principle of zero trust for cybersecurity. Namely, if you don't control it, you can't trust it.
Mm-hmm.
And since you have to consider interoperability and you have to factor in the risk of the environment you're operating in that you don't control, do you have any pro tips for convincing higher up stakeholders, and I'm talking executive types, that this is actually serious and that you do have to treat it like you can't trust it, even though it's likely locked down tighter than Fort Knox?
Mm-hmm. So probably one of the approaches I would take is to make a case as to how cybersecurity can be used as a branding proposition for the firm that you're working for, because ultimately nobody wants to wear a vulnerable device. So it very much becomes a branding and a reputation issue, also a legal risk at some point when cybersecurity is not followed. So I would approach from that mindset to showcase what the advantages and most importantly what the disadvantages are, because companies spend 3 to 4 times more trying to patch their systems, and CrowdStrike is a great example of when processes are not followed, it can cause a lot of devastating effects. So I would take that approach, and coming up with also, I think, simple metrics, KPIs to showcase to the executive management that probably you will take the responsibility and the leadership role here, and the support will come, but you can take the leadership role and start tracking those KPIs, I would say. Probably that approach might be helpful, because ultimately cybersecurity is not a couture, right? It's a couture. It's more a culture that you have to develop since day one.
That is brilliant insight, Nidhi. Thank you for sharing that. Taylor, you are next. Go ahead, please unmute your mic and share what you have in mind.
Thanks, Nidhi. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Great.
Great. Thanks for sharing your insights, Nidhi. Actually, recently, this week, attended a conference where FDA cybersecurity representatives were there. And I wanted to take, and you guys had kind of touched on it earlier, take advantage of that to ask some questions related to probability and exploitability, right? So the FDA guidance explicitly calls out how security risk management should be handled differently than risk management's handled in safety risk from 14971. Rather than addressing probability, they want to look at exploitability. And my question to them was, wouldn't you see exploitability as just a factor of probability, right? So if something is more exploitable, it would be more probable. And their response was, well, and you also touched on it, Nidhi, is now we're talking about what is the probability someone decides to exploit a system, right? So they've seen that people often reduce probability because they see very few exploits, people exploiting those vulnerabilities, which I can appreciate. But one of the things that gets lost in that train of thought is what is captured in 14971 as P2. And P2 is really whenever a hazardous situation happens, what is the probability that a harm would occur? So I kind of addressed that with the FDA, and I said, with only treating exploitability and severity as our scale, we're kind of losing that probability that once that exploit happens, then a specific harm occurs. So they agreed with a premise that you could also introduce a P2 factor on top of exploitability to try and speak more to the safety language that ISO 14971 presents. So I think that helps out, because one of the challenges that we have had at iRhythm and other companies I've worked at is, we have a cybersecurity risk assessment, and then the FDA in both pre-market and post-market guidance tries and puts this idea of evaluation of overall residual security risk acceptability. But from the ISO 14971 perspective, we need to evaluate holistically the device from all aspects of failures, cybersecurity, as well as any design, manufacturing, process, use-related failures. So that's the challenge that we've had, is using exploitability and converting that to language that speaks to 14971. So in our overall risk management report, we can actually have a meaningful overall residual risk. Right.
Fascinating. Yeah. Nidhi, go ahead. Please share some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because there are multiple approaches that you can take, right? Depending on the device and the complexity of the device. In cases where, because whenever we are looking at exploitability, we are looking at the ease with which the vulnerability can be exploited by an attacker. So it's a lot of factors that you're considering based on the controls you have, the experience of the actor, and so on. But probability, on the other hand, is how likely an event can happen. With cybersecurity, you're assuming that the event is going to happen. But exploitability is when that event happens, what is the ease with which the attacker can actually exploit that particular vulnerability? And that's why you're going to have controls. Like, it's more like a defense system around that vulnerability, how difficult it is to get to that vulnerability. So I would differentiate in that sense. But having said that, you can every risk that you take can come from your design, your process, your user, and also your cybersecurity risk, actually. Because when I was working for a medical device manufacturer, I had a similar conundrum where, because every risk can be divided, and cybersecurity need not be completely separate, but it can be one of the factors, like design, process, user risk, and cybersecurity risk. So the FMEA can also address those down there.
Great. I know Ed Bills has joined us, so I would love to hear his perspective. Ed, please go ahead and share what you have in mind.
Yes, Naveen, this is an interesting discussion, and I'm joining you from Maine today, away from the office. And I wanted to point out that the reason we have the annex in 24971 on cybersecurity is that when it comes to Clause 8 in 14971, and we talk about overall residual risk, the risk of cybersecurity fits into that overall, and we need to consider in that stage benefit to risk. And we can't separate cybersecurity and other software risk from the overall risk for the product. So it's important to remember that we need to pull in cybersecurity into that overall residual risk evaluation for the product. And that's why, in fact, the title is, Cyber and Data Security, I think.
Yeah.
In Clause 8. So it talks about any use of data, and AI is going to come in. There's already an AMI guidance on that, AMI BSI, actually, the two together. And that's being an input into a machine learning guidance document that is under construction by the ISO Technical Committee on Risk Management. So all those things merge together when we hit the overall residual risk evaluation step, and we look at the benefit to the risk ratio on the product.
That's an excellent
point. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Ed. Nidhi, this discussion is really very interesting, and here's what is coming to my mind, and I would love for you to kind of share your thoughts on that. the way I look at security risk management is a part of our overall risk analysis process where we can treat the risk a little bit differently in terms of exploitability and severity. But we can treat that from a safety perspective as a contributor to maybe a potential sequence of events that may lead to the risk of harm that Taylor so eloquently talked about. But that's a work we can do maybe outside of our security risk analysis process in building that bridge. Am I thinking in the right way, or do you see some problem with this approach?
I think we can take that approach, but it might get a little complicated, I think.
Okay.
When we start to merge safety and security, it can start to get complicated with respect to the consequence of events. It can get, it's very interesting because you're getting into nitty-gritties of what the consequence of events is and will that lead to harm or not, and do we have compensating controls if not actual controls for it.
Yeah.
But when you keep them both separately, I feel like, especially for not as complex devices and for startups who don't have a lot of resources and deep expertise, it's best to keep them separate at that point.
Gotcha.
That's what I think.
Got you. Thank you so much. I'm sure we'll have lots of conversation on this topic. So, Vikas, you have joined us. Please unmute your mic and share what you have in mind. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for this interesting conversation. My question is about how well we can do the risk assessment. Especially the risk assessment itself has an inherent limitation. So basically, we are trying to aware of the environment, or we are trying to see the foreseeable environment. But what about the unforeseen things which we cannot predict, or very extreme events or some threats or disruptions?
Great point. Nidhi, you have any thoughts to share on that?
Yes, but there are always going to be unknown unknowns. And the best way, I think, at that point to deal with unknown unknowns is putting certain processes and plans in place for resiliency and recovery. That's where I think we can start to combat that, because one is foreseeable risks and the other are unforeseeable risks. With unforeseeable risks and uncontrolled risks, from security standpoint, this can be covered in your resiliency and recovery piece. That's why there's a lot of talk about how to build resilient systems today.
Yeah.
That preparation needs to come from there.
I think it's a great point, Nidhi, that you have highlighted. And we had in our Let's Talk Risk conversation a discussion about resilience with Marco Felsberger, who's not in the medical device industry. He comes from the logistics industry. But what I'm thinking here is that, and feeling that our world is changing so fast that risk management is not by itself sufficient. We have to be resilient. So it's becoming like an emerging, evolving need. So I'll leave it at that because I know we are running out of time. But I want to give you just a couple of minutes to think about some key points that you can share with us as we go away today. In the meantime, guys, I want to share with you a couple of quick announcements. Once again, for the next 2 weeks, we will not have our sessions. I'm in the middle of a transition, so things are happening. Nothing bad, but I'm just in the middle of a transition. So we will meet once again. I think October 11th is the next time we're going to meet, and that's going to be a fascinating conversation at the intersection of medical safety and quality regulatory. I hope you don't miss that. Keep an eye on the announcement that will go on the LinkedIn feed. And as always, I invite you to become a part of the Let's Talk Risk community. The link to subscribe to the Let's Talk Risk website is here on the events page. If you're not already a subscriber, you can become a free subscriber because more than 80% of the information there is free for everybody. I welcome you to join that. There are already about 2,500 people across the world as part of our community, which is growing really fast. So we are hoping to expand that and learn from each other. I hope you will consider and join. With that, Nidhi, the floor is yours. If you want to share some key points to take away, that'll be great.
I would say starting with one would be, if you're developing a product, start your security risk assessment way early on. It's going to be much easier to build the documentation and tell the story right for FDA to also understand it better. And second is cybersecurity is a culture. It has to be developed day one, and each one of us is involved. And the last one I would say is that if you are looking to make a jump or looking to transition, now is the right time to do it. So trust yourself and go for it.
Awesome, Nidhi. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but guys, this is also an opportunity to connect with all of us. Did you know that you can send a direct message to anybody who is attending in the audience today, even though you are not a first degree connection to them on LinkedIn? I encourage you to connect with each other, reach out to Nidhi, make a connection, get to know each other. I'm sure we can learn and continue collaborating. With that, guys, thank you so much. So much again. This was such an energizing, amazing conversation. How are you guys feeling? Show me some reaction through the emoji icons. I want to hear from you. If you have any comments or feedback, you can always reach out to me, send me a direct message. Get in touch. This conversation is for all of us. So the more you are involved, the more you let me know what's on your mind, what will help you, and how you can participate, the better it will be for all of us. With that, guys, thanks once again, and I wish all of you a very good weekend ahead. We will meet again on October 11th. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.